So, hey guys, welcome back to Spitball Experts. We are in our second part of the show. My name is Dirk. I'm a youth pastor living in Switzerland, and I am really eager for today. Arnold, please do tell us what you do with your life in the lockdown.
I am still trying to be a youth pastor. It is very difficult, but it is very rewarding after a while, hopefully, when people start coming to Bible study. But it starts working out. So, but yeah, lockdown, we don't even know what level it is anymore in South Africa. So we just take it as it comes. And all we need to know is we're not allowed to be at home or out of our houses after 9 p.m. at night. So yeah, that's basically what we do.
It would be a little bit difficult if you're not allowed to be at home after the curfew. That would be a little bit interesting.
But yeah, anyway, so I think that's life. That's South African life, so it just makes sense. So
that's nice. That's nice, man. I'm glad you're doing psychologically well. That's really, as a friend, that is very important to me, you know.
Anyway, so we've got someone with us here today, Dirk.
Yes, so today I'm excited. I'm really excited because we're continuing with our show called Mainstream Christianity. Arnold will do a little recap for those of you who missed it, or you just have to watch it again. But today we have a guest. So we have Mr. Cy Hoggen. I don't know if I'm saying his surname correctly, like Hoggen. So just a little bit introduction here. Cy lived in my house in South Africa, well, my parents' house in South Africa for a month, and that's how we have a mutual friend. He was on there, Andy. Cy has interesting views. I love the guy to bits, and I think just it's so cool. Cy, can you please introduce yourself to our audience quickly?
Interesting views. Is that the terms and conditions apply introduction to say like this guy can say something ridiculous?
That is all being edited in. That's all going to be edited in, so don't worry. So
that was like this. That was the quick way to say these views and opinions are of his own.
I love the way you do things and do life and just the way you think. But please do introduce yourself.
Yeah, cool. So I am from England originally, but I live in Scotland. Really key that you get that clear now. Apparently, if you say like I'm English and you're in Scotland, so I live in Scotland with my wife. We are both in ministry, like these boys, youth pastors, not paid, like volunteer on top of our role, which is quite cool actually. It's a stretch. Yeah, I love to do whatever. I'm a fad, so I love DIY right now, but ask me in 3 months, that'll change. And the other thing is I always beat Dirk at golf, so that's all you need to know.
Yeah. Okay, I remember the story differently. I have a story that...
You do you, bro. You do you.
Well, I think we leave it at that. I'm just going to say that the lake out there had your naked bottom in it. So we'll just leave it at that. But anyway.
Join in a future podcast to find out more. No, boys, it's awesome to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And let's keep it in English. And if you want to go over to one of your 3-4 languages that you boys speak, I'll be lost. So
anyway, before we get into that story of Cy in a lake or beating Dirk at golf, I really do want to hear that story, but I don't think today is going to be for that. But well, we can maybe make it like a little blooper part at the end. Who knows? Anything.
I'll weave it in. Oh,
just like work it into your story, like the golden thread. Just like,
okay.
All right, cool. So last week we spoke on mainstream Christianity, what the mainstream Christianity is all about. And we started asking this question, okay, but how would we define this term? And we got into the talking points of the hip church, the global mega church versus your smaller churches, and how a lot of churches are starting to focus a lot more on the hype of the church, but not necessarily the message of Christ in the church, which is quite interesting. So today we are going to take it a bit further with like mainstream Christianity part 2. And for this, we thought we would bring in expert advice from the guy from England that lives in Scotland that apparently can beat Dirk at golf, which I have to say, if you can do that, well done. Because I've played golf with Dirk from like grade 9, and that is how long ago? I don't know, but so long ago. And I've never been able to beat him. So it either says that I'm just really bad at golf, which is very possible, or Dirk is just very good. So,
or I suffer from dyscalculia and can't count.
It's a testament of me. It's a testament of my skills of kicking the ball out of the rough. But anyway, it's
So Dirk, what is going to be the first question for our wise Sai Huggen today?
So I think, Sai, can you? What is your understanding of mainstream Christianity? I know it's a very broad term, and we covered it last week. But just for like, I would just love to hear what you think of mainstream Christianity and what would your definition be about it.
I'll be honest. I obviously did my homework when you emailed me, and I listened to the podcast last week. I haven't a clue. Like, sorry to read. No, like you've asked some questions coming up that you think are more challenging, but question number one's really hard. But for the sake of the conversation, to try and, I think what you're trying to say is like, maybe the Pentecostal charismatic church. Maybe like could I go far as say we're talking about? I don't know. In my understanding of in the UK, we're probably leaning towards like the charismatic movement versus the more conservative. So for what does that mean? Like we're the happy clappy church people, right? So we're the ones that have the band and the music and push people over and put mats over them, and that's a joke. Maybe not. No, so I think if I may kind of take that into, I think that's what we're talking about in terms of the mainstream is like, especially in the UK, because we've got more denominations here than we have sushi. Like it's just like, I don't know about in Switzerland and South Africa, but it's just denomination after denomination, and so yes, I think the mainstream would be the charismatic movement would be pointing at the more conservatives, saying this is mainstream, and the conservatives would probably be pointing back at the charismatic, saying that we're all losing the Bible. So my understanding of it, probably in this setting where I live, is probably more that term would probably actually exist more in the charismatic Pentecostal movement more than it would maybe in the Church of England or the Catholic Church.
So interesting. I think that's the thing with terms or defining what does words actually mean. Just if you look at basic language understanding, and I find it really interesting that the charismatic or the Pentecostals are, at the moment, they are mainstream. Like that is kind of the direction Christianity for me seems to push in that direction, which I find is okay. I'm not meaning that the traditional churches are nonsense or anything like that. I think they really pushed a lot of these things forward. Maybe it's like a reformation within the Pentecostals comes from that. I mean, that is like the little reformation that we find with John G. Lake and those people in Parliament and in the US and Azusa Street. Like maybe that, I don't know, like that just seems to me like there was a little reformation in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and
I think
to me it seems like we got jealous of that. I don't know, but
I think like, and we're probably gonna. This is kind of what we're discussing, isn't it? I think there is a danger. Like I think you can have a really conservative Reformed church and a Pentecostal charismatic church that can be both a way off. I don't think it's just the charismatic church that's way off. There are certain denominations that are really conservative. We'll try and not name names, that are way off right now in terms of some of the things they're setting at the high level. So, but I think the charismatic church gets more hate for being way off. Like, so if we're going back to like biblical church model and biblical teaching stuff, the conservative church maybe goes under the radar for that more than the charismatic church, if you like. I don't know.
Say,
maybe.
guys, I think I have to add to this as well, where I actually saw this again last week, where we're finding how the portrayal of church is put out in the world, is put out in the sense of these two worlds. And Sai, you just touched on that as well, but it's put out in these two worlds where you've got the very conservative side, you've got your solid Catholic church where you still go in, you have to be quiet, you light a candle and all of that. And then you get the guys who, and then they portray the church as these weird guys on the other end, where it's a guy who kind of like wants to kidnap a little girl, but he's wearing a priest robe and all of that. Or it's people that are just going crazy. And you find these two polar opposites that's being put out into the world. And I think that is also something that where people, the moment that they start thinking of church, that is their immediate reaction. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a guy who said he doesn't want to be in church because the church is just for crazy people, because that's what he's seeing all over. Where it's like, what? Where did you see this? And he's like, no, he's been watching a lot of movies. I'm like, that's your problem. You've been watching a lot of movies to find the answers of church. So
Thank you, Hollywood.
Yeah, and I think that is where the essence of church has been lost in civilization right now.
Well, have you seen Greenleaf on Netflix?
Yes, for example. I mean, that is insane.
Brilliant. I mean, terrible.
I missed that one. I've been
Yeah,
watching
you'll love it.
Horsemen. It's obscure. But yeah, let's
We digress. No, it's a good point, Arnold. I think you're right. I think that's it. What do we mean by church? And what we mean by church in the church is different to what
Definitely.
the people outside understand or mean.
Yeah.
Hey, and that is what I find so interesting about today. Today we'll really just tap into the hip culture currently in church. And Arnold, I would really love to see your here, or just what do you think about the hip culture that had such a great impact in modern church, like the last, say, 10 years? I mean, not just this. I mean, we joke a lot about skinny jeans and tattoos and
a man bun. And a man bun, basically. So.
And a man bun.
Yes.
But that might be out now. Like maybe it's more
I really
2008, I think, the top knot. But
I really. No, but
no, let's see.
there we go, Sai.
Audio viewers, Simon just removed his cap.
So,
Sorry, right, carry on.
If you guys didn't know what just happened, if you're listening to the podcast, go watch the video on YouTube. You'll see Sai almost has a top knot. So anyway, so when it comes to, I think that this hip culture that we're talking of, I think first of all we find two sides to this. You find the hip culture church where they are literally just adapting their surroundings, adapting their personalities or their lifestyle or whatever the case is, like suddenly going from wearing a suit to wearing a jean and a button shirt. For some churches, that is hip.
Ripped jeans.
Yeah, ripped jeans and like Converse All-Stars or something. But for some churches, that is extremely hip. That is for them like up there, okay? Other churches find that, okay, but that's what I wear every day. So then their hip culture goes over to the side then again of who am I interacting with celebrity-wise or whatever the case is, trying to create a vibe around the church and trying to create a hype around the church. Yeah. Honestly, so my opinion on this is, being in South Africa, we don't really have the sense of hype amongst churches or this hip culture. We do have some major churches that are international that are trying to establish the very same type of thing in South Africa. But I mean, I still haven't found people who are actually trying to be hip in the church here. In the broader church spectrum, in the broader church circles, I think the hip culture, if we can, I really think we need to find a better word for that. But the culture shift that came in has made a big impact on church, because suddenly the church seems relevant in the sense of the church is approachable. A lot of times the pastor or the congregants were seen as, listen, you are over there, I'm over here, and suddenly I'm not allowed to come to you because you are holier than thou, because you look like that. where I think the hip culture kind of got into the place of saying, listen, I'm still a person as a pastor. I still sin. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I still sin as a pastor.
What? You sin as a human being? I mean, first of all, you're a human being. I mean,
Exactly.
that just...
And I think the hip culture brought that down, saying, listen, the church isn't supposed to be up here, holier than thou, unapproachable for people like under here. It's not that. Christ is the image of the church. I think the hip culture just kind of opened it up a little bit more for people to find church a little bit more appealing, trying to see, okay, listen, I can actually go to church because it's not just, and please forgive me if this offends anyone, but it's not just a thing I'm gonna sit there, listen to an organ and a sermon that's gonna be like an hour from a guy who's got like one voice pattern the whole time, and then I'm gonna go home. Okay, but it's not gonna be that. It's gonna be something that can engage. And I think that is what really shifted the church in terms of the hip culture. And that I personally don't find anything wrong with that. I find the problem comes in when the whole church is only known for the culture like that. When the church is known for, listen, people are actually finding Christ in that church, or finding a discipleship process in that church, or whatever the case is.
That's so interesting. Sai, how's that in England? How, like...
Scotland.
How is that vibe in Scotland? I mean, you are in a quite like the Gate Church, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's quite a charismatic Pentecostal movement church, and it seems to be going in this line. I don't know. You need to explain.
Yeah, no. I think.
What is your take on the question?
I think it's hilarious when within the church, when the church finally gets up, or the people within the church comes up to, like, let's say within 3 or 4 years of society on things, and then all of a sudden it's like, you're selling out, blah blah blah, when in actual fact, like, the church and the people or the culture is often still way behind society and culture, which super frustrates me. So when then the church or the people, whether it's how they dress or how they communicate on social media or what, when the church tries to lead in culture, society, or even just keep up, then you have this group of people that then start throwing rocks and saying, like, the hipsters, the blah blah, they've watered down the gospel, blah blah, etc. etc. So you're right on, like, you hit the nail on the head. Like, what the most important thing about growing church is, or one of, that's a big statement, is not asking the church what they think about church. Like, not asking, is asking or realizing what the people not in the building think or perceive. And you're right on, like, it's not like the Bible says, become all things to all people, or like, look, even just in how Jesus did ministry, like, he knew how to engage where, like he knew how to get down in the dirt with the woman caught in adultery, yet he knew how to go to a tax collector's place for dinner, because in the cultural, that was him doing like a business meeting with a tax collector. So Jesus knew how to engage different people groups, right? Yeah. So when we try to do that, and I believe, I think we all three of us are in churches where we're trying to be like engaging, and cool is one word, just relevant to the culture we live in is another. Yeah, like, but you're right on. Like I said at the start, though, you could have suit wearing, tie wearing preachers in churches where they are more reverent, and they could be just as way off theologically as the charismatic hipster church. I don't think the issue is hipster or not hipster. I think it's the internal heart issue, isn't it? But yeah, like, it's funny, isn't it? The media is a funny thing, as well.
If I can just quickly add this as well. Sorry, Dirk. I saw this past week. I follow this guy on Instagram, and I don't really want to get his handle out, but he's a youth pastor, I don't know, somewhere, or he just does a lot of stuff for youth pastors in America. And he posted this thing of Todd White this past week, where he started talking on, okay, so you find how, put it in our terms now, how Todd White is known for this major ministry of healing and traveling the world and, all of this type of stuff, being very charismatic. But where a lot of what Todd White was preaching, and this is what Todd White said in his sermon, I think the past week or 2 weeks ago, I'm not too sure. But he said he apologizes for only preaching certain things in the gospel because of what his congregants wanted to hear. Because he knew that there is more to the Bible than what he was preaching, and he deliberately stopped preaching that. And I think a lot of times this is what happens in mainstream churches or in hip culture. We preach only what the congregants want to hear. And Sai, you just said that as well. We tend to only go and hear from what our people want to hear, instead of, that's fine, but we still have people outside the church that don't have a church, that don't have that home. But I think that is something of the hip culture that we kind of miss as well, that can miss as well.
And it's you guys touch on so many interesting points. I think it's so interesting that you're like, both of you touched on the thing that, hey, it's an internal process, it's an internal choice. It's not about the hip culture. And I think from my point of view, a lot of it has to do with jealousy, because these people are drawing large crowds. It's not like if we take, let's just step out of the controversy for a moment, and we look at churches like mainstream churches that's really driving culture, Christian culture at the moment. We look at Hillsong. I mean, what Carl Lenz is doing in New York is really amazing. If we, I mean, Simon myself, we had an interesting conversation at the Lake of Como when Justin Bieber, Christian, we had some interesting conversations around it, and realizing that, can a church have a celebrity in the church? And is that even allowed? I don't know. Well, I find it really interesting and cool, but just the conversation was already a little bit polarized, where I thought, I mean, just thinking about this guy's life and what he's done, and really also seeing my own hypocrisy in that. And I think that is what I want to say is how quickly we are to put these things out there and going, well, I'm just from a little church, we preach the entire law of God, and we are all great, and we become self-righteous in that. And I find it so interesting that that's sometimes our point of view, and not seeing the great things that has come from these churches. I mean, if we talked about this last week, resources. I mean, we benefit from, I know Bill Hybel screwed up, but anyway, we benefit from these churches, mega churches, hip churches. I mean, the culture came in. I mean, Germany benefited from the idea of planting urban churches. So I don't know. I find it really interesting and partially good. But yeah, it's really, it's a I don't know.
I don't understand, I find it frustrating that often the people who are offended by mega churches would be the ones who would probably coin phrases like, we preach the Bible, we just do expository, that kind of ilk. Again, I'm maybe jumping to some conclusions, that's maybe unfair of me, but in my experience, let's put it that way, the people who are offended by mega churches are people who are not obviously in mega churches, and they claim maybe to know the scripture more and preach the scripture more than these mega churches. And yet when we read the scripture and we get the thread from Genesis to Revelation about the heart of God to seek the lost and to seek out his people, why are we offended then by a mega church? Because that, now, like Arnold, you talked about this last week, I absolutely agree about community connection, it's key. But my point is just like, will people, let's get to the nitty gritty, will people be in heaven because of XYZ's ministry? Yes. And we do a good job, don't we, in society and the church, of judging from a distance. You've never met Stephen Furtick. I've never met Carl Lentz, never met Todd White. I've seen him through a filtered snapshot window. Yep. And yeah, like, we're all preaching, we're all on podcast. I could send you some of my sermons, and I listen back to my own sermons. It's a good practice. I hate it, but it's good for you as a communicator. man, I've said some heretical stuff in the. I'm not, but I've never got up there with a heart of like, here's some heresy. Like it's about us growing and learning. Yes, much is given, much is
What
expected.
you did not get up there to mislead the flock.
No. Like my heart is to seek and save the lost, and so all that to say is like, we're just very good at being Jonah. Like you're getting mad when God shows mercy. Like how quickly can we pull down Kanye West or Justin Bieber? Like because we get mad at God's mercy. Like who are we? Like get mad at the God who saved us and gave us mercy. I know, but that person over there.
No. Yes, amen, brother.
I think as well, something that we're finding in South Africa as well is the issue with a lot of the mega churches is that a lot of people tend to, I mean, break down mega churches or big churches or whatever we want to call it, and it's usually the smaller churches because people are drawn to the crowd. And so the moment that there is a bigger church, people are drawn to that. And then that kind of, I'm not saying it sucks the smaller churches dry of the people, but I know just here with us, we've got a policy because we're in an environment where we're about 4 or 5 churches very close to one another. And I mean, we're like 3 churches right next to each other. And in this community, we said, listen, we work together because this is a kingdom community. But we, as the church that I'm in, is still a big church. I mean, we've got a bunch of campuses all over the world. And people tend to want to leave the smaller church to go to a bigger church because of the hype at the bigger church. Where we've got the agreements here saying, listen, if we know, and I know this is just with the youth, but we know that if there is a teenager, for example, coming from another church to our church to say, no, I got bored of my other church. No, this is where more people is at. We say, no, listen, why do you come here? We're not in the business of trying to steal people from your church. That is not what the point is. And I think that is what's happening. That is not what is happening that is what's happening in the world as well. The moment that people start seeing big churches is they feel that their church will not benefit from that. And they will lose their people to a bigger church. And I think that is where a lot of concern also comes in with a bunch of mega churches.
Yeah, and like, kind of, I know you wanted to discuss this anyway, Dick, about like the label and stuff. So we're probably going there organically. But yeah, like church hopping, church skipping is nothing new. Like, and you're right. Like it's church for all. Like, and what I mean by that is like we need to be okay as a more charismatic church if people meet with Jesus and grow in their relationship with Jesus in a more conservative environment. That's okay. Likewise, if a teenager is more engaged because there's people of their age in a church that's got that, also shouldn't offend the church where there's one teenager trying to walk this thing called life on their own. So I think we need to just be better at just not competing and complementing and working together. Like, I don't know a city in the world where there's not some kind of like that church down the road or that. And we need to be better at learning off each other and growing. Yeah, there's, you can, like, again, we're going on the Hillsong, HTB, Holy Trinity Brampton. Let's use a different example. In big church in London, planting all around the UK. They've just planted in Preston, which is like where I'm from originally, and people are flocking to it because they see on YouTube what HTB is, they see, and they go to it. But I think we need to be a bit more secure in our churches as well, because if those people are leaving to go to there's one of 2 things. Number one is you're not engaging them enough in your church yourself or connecting them in your community, or number 2, they've got a heart issue anyway. So like they're leaving to go to the mega church, and then this church blames the mega church or whatever.
Yeah.
The people who've left, they've got a heart issue, because if they or you're not connecting them. So actually, I don't think the issue is deep down is actually the big church is stealing people. The people who are moving are probably going to hop and leave that church eventually, because they're going to say, like, nobody sees me, like nobody knows my name. Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, so I just think actually there's a bigger issue going on, but it gets labeled and masked with the mega church is stealing people or saturating.
Yeah.
It does happen. Hillsong plant and small churches die. It happens, and that is sad. But I don't know. Can't solve that overnight, can we? Go on, Dirk. What were you going to say, Barry?
No, I think you make a very, very good point. And partially I forgot what I wanted to say, so that really brings me. And that's why we are spitball experts, right? We are more spitballing than being experts. But I find it so fascinating that we start the blame game, like straight off. Like, hey, Hillsong moved into our environment. Oh, they're robbing the youth. It's like, for goodness sake, yeah, obviously they're gonna rob the youth. They are freaking relevant.
Yeah.
Let's just get that out there. And I find it interesting. We have a big church here in Switzerland called ICF, and sometimes I feel like some criticism are justified. Like, we need to be always critical and stuff like that. But sometimes I just think, well, why not? They have this 20 movement that's really good. It's really great. Like, they are doing things in the city of Zurich that is really good. It doesn't work in other parts of Switzerland per se, but it's working and it's impacting a city, and that's what we want to see. We want to see the gospel transforming and changing communities. That is the one aspect of the gospel that we want to see happening. But I sometimes find it so interesting. This is what I wanted to say. These mega churches are still very conservative. It's never a theological issue. Like, let's be just honest. Most people moving away is not per se theologically inclined. I mean, a lot of people don't even have a clue what certain theological ideas would be, and that's not their fault. I mean, that's just the nature of life. But we see people moving because of kids ministry. That's a big pull for young families. So maybe that is one thing that I think we can call it hip, we can call it mega church, whatever. And that is one big push they started doing. If you look at I mean, what is it? Rick Warren, one of his first sermons was on how to raise your child. That is really crazy. Start your church and let's preach on that. Not the counsel of God. That's quite a fascinating thing to think about. So, hey guys, is it justified? Is this label justified? Let me start with you, Sai. What do you think? Is this hey, you're just hip, you have no clue actually, you're theologically on the wayside. Do you think this label is this negative label, do you think it's justified?
No. It's no, it's judging from a distance. And I think the hip label is used to mask, like you touched upon it, is a church being engaging and relevant is a hip church. And there's hip churches that are way off theologically as non-hip churches. So I think the label is just being, I don't think it's justified, but I'm also probably in the hip church camp. But I'm not offended by it. I'm all right with it. For me, like, I would rather sell out. Here's a big theological. Ooh. I'd rather sell out to be relevant, to engage 10 people that don't know Jesus, than to stick to my guns and not stick to my theological guns and not engage them 10 people. There we go. My pastor's going to be on the phone in about an hour's time.
I love it. But then the conversation can continue, and that's the object. But yeah.
Arnold, justified or not?
I don't think so. I agree with what you're saying. I think people are starting to use it as an excuse. People are starting to use this whole thing of the hip culture label as either an excuse to just complain about something, because let's be real, a lot of people love to complain, like the typical Karens of the world. But
that I find a little bit derogatory towards white people, but that's a different story. But
we here at Spitball Experts love all people. Anyway, so
oh, we're edging towards politics now. That's so funny. Anyway, sorry, man.
Next week.
I think someone just mute me now and then we're done. No, but I think a lot of people love to complain, and a lot of people love to use the excuse saying, listen, no, that church is too hip, you're going to miss the message there. And that is judging. That's all you're doing. The thing is, a hip culture church is doing something differently, but with the same message of Christ. That is what the objective should be. And a lot of people tend to bash that, saying, no, you're too caught up in the hype than what you are in the message. We don't know that. You're not there. Are you there? And if you have fallen victim to a hip church, if I can put it that way, the way you weren't engaged, then that is not the church's fault. That might be one person's fault. It is not the church. It is perhaps someone who couldn't engage. I don't think that label is justified. I think it's just another label given in a world where we shouldn't even be giving labels. Let's be honest.
It's fascinating. I don't know. I think it's partially justified. I think my dad has a saying that I really enjoy. He uses
really?
a little bit more crude language for this,
No.
which I think in its essence, in the essence of the saying, is worth using those words for. So, I mean, he's not. Move on. But he says you are the architect of your own issues. So you are the architect of your own crap. Let's put it like that.
So Sai and myself already know what that full sentence is. If you as the viewer or the listener want to know, drop us an email.
My Afrikaans is limited, but I think I'm...
Anyway, sorry, Dirk, but your dad has this statement.
So you're the architect of your own crap, of your own nonsense. And I think that is true. That is it's also sort of biblical. Just look at the Cain and Abel story. Like, it's biblical. Maybe not in the words he uses it, but it's still profound and good. And I think it's partially justified. Yes, I think they did do some nonsense, like chewing the carpet, doing weird things, which sometimes is like okay.
In South Africa, giving Dettol to the people to drink or spraying them with broom.
And I understand that, but I think it's coming to the essence. What is we are the body of Christ. That I think the best thing I was at uni, and it was so interesting. I sat one day and I was like, man, what would be the right church then? And it's like, yeah, I'm so glad there is a multitude of churches trying to serve Jesus in a different expression. Imagine if everyone expressed Jesus the same way. That would be so boring. So I find that aspect in the last couple of years coming through, especially with the urban churches planting. I think it's brilliant. People trying to do things, bring the gospel to the community, bring people to be transformed and by the renewal of their minds and by Christ. And I find that so awesome. So I think it's justified partly, and I think it's unjustified because we judge from distance, like we said, and sometimes we're just pompous in our opinions without really getting into the grit of it, talking to the pastors there or going to the church and say, okay, let me listen to what this guy has to say. Not, well, he doesn't have the theological foundation. I mean, that's a little bit pompous of us to make. And I know I'm one of them. I sit in a service and go, well, I don't think this guy has the theological basis for that. I need to be honest. Struggle with that. Got better. Don't ask my wife. But anyway, but I think that's the first thing. Hey, what is my opinion of the body of Christ? And is it just a one church fits all type of environment? Or can we challenge these guys and say, hey, maybe look at this point, or maybe they are shining a light on what we would say the traditional conservative movement is doing, going, well, guys, what are you doing? Are you still relevant? Are you connecting with the conservative people you have in front of you? Are you doing that in a relevant way? That is a different way of looking at it. So,
but Dirk, I think that's something right now in the lockdown period, or the whole COVID period, is where churches needed to adapt very quickly and needed to change very quickly from being a simple church just gathering together with their 50 people or with their 5,000 people every week. The 5,000 people church was simple enough. They carried on with their online services as well. But your smaller churches who don't necessarily have the resources for that couldn't really go into an online service. now we see how the church is starting to help one another do that. We see how the church is starting to, just here in South Africa, we're seeing how the church is starting to become creative. We see how the church is starting to make to make it much more accessible to get the message of Christ out to their congregation as well. And I think that changes.
It's taken a global pandemic for the church to have to pivot. Like,
exactly.
Why? Like, you know, like, and I get the resourcing. We're a church of, and I'm not like, we're a church of about 300, around that mark. You know what I mean? In the holiday season, we're 180. On a good Easter, it's 350, like,
yeah,
or whatever. We've really struggled, like, in terms of resource. We don't have a huge budget and the online thing, but we've had to pivot. We've had to engage. I think I was just thinking though, like, the key is authenticity.
Yeah.
Like, you can go into a church of 5,000 people that you would call hip, and it can be authentic because they're doing them. They are themselves. They're true to what they want to do. And you can also then go into a church that's trying to then replicate this church, and it's just so like, and we know it. You walk in, it's like, this is so forced and fake and weird. So, and then they would get called maybe the hip church, and that's where then this label is justified. But you can go into a Catholic church and it be authentic.
Yeah.
And there's a reverence to God, to worship. That's why we do church ultimately, isn't it? Is to worship God, to put attention on who God is. And so, like, we just need to be authentic to who we want to be. Like, what do we do well? Like, are we a church that has a really strong, like, set of musicians that means we can lead people into the presence of God through musical worship? Or do we actually have like a really strong communicator? You know, like authenticity doesn't have a number. Authenticity doesn't have a size. It's a heart thing. It's a DNA thing.
It's so great that you touch on that. And so would you say that would be your opinion on how will this help the church to be effective for the future? I mean, we're all thinking about the future constantly, no matter who you are. Like, that's just what you're doing. If you're leading a church, that's just it. Or ministry, that's it. Would that, like, this authentic idea, would that kind of latch onto your opinion for the future? Or what do you think is maybe two things that church can do to do that, like, to be effective? I don't know.
No, I know. It's the £1,000,000 question, isn't it? How do you grow church? How do we, like, and we've all got, and there's different aspects, but you're right. I think authenticity is really key. Because people in the world, like, so where I fall is churches for the lost, not for the found. So that, you know, like, if you were to, like, there's nuances within that discipleship, I get that, but, you know, like, if you just force me to I'd rather preach a message that 30 people in my congregation say I'm not getting fed, but 30 people get found. You know, like, that's where what makes me tick. So I think authenticity is key because people won't engage with phonies and fake. And the other thing is, or there's several, but is, we just got to engage. We've got to be better at conversation in terms of connecting people, community. Like, we say we have a team. Me and Tori lead like a team, and we just try and give them really practical. Some of them are quite introverted, if you want to use a phrase. We have to, like, and we just say, right, learn a name, learn something about them, and learn something that you can, like, find out what's happening in the week that you can ask them next week. Like, and then we're just dead practical. So I come, hey Arnold, nice to see you. How's your granddad doing? Hey Arnold, how did that exam go? Hey Arnold, like, that new pair of footy boots you bought this week, how are they? Why am I doing that? I'm valuing you enough to learn something about you. And I think the church is rubbish sometimes at growing numbers without connecting people, but I think it can be both. I think you can be a small church with lots of people, but we have to be authentic. We have to connect people. We have to preach the gospel, blah blah blah. But it's people. We're in a business of people, so let's be better with people.
Yeah. So, Arnold, any last thoughts?
Just what Sai said. I think we can end it off on that. On his wisdom.
He's got some wisdom and some great kicks. Like, if you want to see someone with a good kicks game, then, man, this guy's shoe closet. For those of you that don't know the term, it's shoes. I mean, this guy's closet. I helped him move once, and he's got a lot of shoes, and that's brilliant. I mean,
This is true.
but that shows just it's
I'm
not
a good steward. I'm a good steward. I've got pairs of trainers I've had for 5 years that still are in pristine condition. Not because I hoard them, but I steward them. There, justified.
good steward. Yeah, justified. No, I mean, maybe that just sums up sometimes how I think your brain works. It's just like if you look at your shoe closet, you have some great shoes, and you're always ready to engage in a conversation that is meaningful. And I appreciate that from you, Arnold. I don't know your kicks game, but
very simple. I have got Converse, Pluckies, and Fellies. That's all I need. I'm South African.
I envy you though, bro. It's, your morning routine is a lot faster than mine.
No, it is.
Like, like when I preach, oh man, you might want to stop the recording. We're going to go away. I do 3 hours of sermon prep and 3 hours to plan my outfit. Like,
and welcome to the Hip Church 101.
Outfit is more important than the mess. No, that's
disregard this last part to the start.
I'm joking.
Nah, it's cool. Hey guys, thank you for the conversation. Please do keep the conversation going. Go home to your pastor or your elder or your mother with some great questions, either on church or just life. Or
yeah,
if you really want to get stoned, go politics at the moment. But just keep the conversation going. Arnold, where can people find us? Where can they listen to us?
So yeah, guys, we are on YouTube, obviously, as you can see. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and share. If you're listening to this, you will find us, or if you want to share it with someone who just wants to listen, we are on the Apple Podcasts app and also Spotify. Also go subscribe there, share there. And who knows, this might be something that someone needs to hear that might be able to get them either to reconsider church or reconsider their opinion on church. And this might be the answer that someone's looking for. So share it with someone. If you've got any suggestions, any ideas, drop it in the comment section. We will respond as well. And we will take it into consideration as well. Cool.
Hey guys, thanks for your time. Have a beautiful week and enjoy your lives as best as possible. Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, folks.